Hey everybody, welcome back to this episode of can you hear me, Jeremy? All right, my microphone's out. Welcome back to this episode of Think Business. Looking forward to talking with Jeremy Pollack. Jeremy, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. Pollack Peacebuilding Systems. Let me give a quick bio. Leader in the field of workplace conflict resolution and peace building, founder of Pollack Peacebuilding Systems, an international conflict resolution consulting firm. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you you being on the show. So let's talk about conflict for a minute. Conflict is, I feel like there's a lot of, internal conflict, I think, with people right now, coming out of COVID and figuring, and then carrying that maybe conflict into the workplace. Mm-hmm. So let's kind of start there. The concern about being around people, the hybrid model, the being asked to come back to work, just like that internal narrative. And so can you share a little bit about, how companies are dealing with that level of conflict?
How they're dealing with people's internal fears, essentially. Yeah. From a practical standpoint, so from a practical standpoint, I think that a lot of companies are doing their best to be somewhat inclusive in their decision making around how people are going to be coming back to the office. So it seems at least the companies that we're working with, a lot of them are trying their best to just gauge, hey, how do you feel about coming back to the office? We're going to open up the office to some hybrid models. Are you comfortable with this? Do you want to? So they're trying to get some sense of how people feel about it and letting people make some autonomous decisions. And I think that's probably important. Obviously, there are certain jobs that require people to be on site, and those haven't really changed. So people are getting used to that. And I think there's some challenges in some companies with, there's certain employees that have to be on site for certain types of jobs and certain ones don't. And so the ones that do have to be there, can be upset about the fact that they have to be there and others don't, and that kind of thing. So, so there's some challenges navigating that stuff. But I would just say, if I'm going to give someone advice, be as inclusive as possible, meaning give as much space for input and feedback from the workforce as you can when making these types of decisions. Don't make them unilaterally or just mandated from the top, because that tends to feel very threatening to people.
Yeah. Let's talk about your book for a minute. You got a new book, The Conflict Resolution Playbook, Practical Communication Skills for Preventing, Managing, and Resolving Conflict. I think, a lot of times I think people don't know how to communicate effectively when it comes to conflict. And I think, what tools can you provide not only to get into the right space, right, to get kind of grounded before you approach conflict, but then how to approach conflict without causing more conflict?
Yeah. Well, and it depends on whether you're sort of the receiver or the sender in a certain context. Like if you have the problem and you're bringing it to someone else and you want to sort of lead that potentially difficult conversation, that's one kind of strategy. And then if you're fielding, someone else's conflict or problem with you and you have to respond to it in some effective way without just sort of blowing up or defending or just shutting down and ignoring, then that's also a different type of sequence. And I kind of go through some of those different scenarios in the book. And I think number one, you brought something up that's really important. Number one is if you're going to go lead a conversation that's going to be potentially difficult because you're going to tell someone something that you don't like about what they're doing or what they said or something like that, then you better be in a good space yourself. You better be well rested and not feel super hungry or exhausted and not feel super triggered and that kind of thing. And you have to be in a good standard space because they're likely to become defensive, potentially. And you've got to be able to handle their defensiveness. And I would say when you're, I don't know if we have enough time to go into some basic strategies, but
yeah, let's do it.
But I essentially, they talk a lot about I statements in conflict resolution. So talking about not being accusatory, like, hey, you did something bad or wrong, but really talking about someone's behavior, not about their character. So I think that's just a basic of conflict resolution is, can you identify the behavior that you had an issue with And in some cases, you may even reassure them that you understand it's not their character that you're trying to judge. You understand, I know you're busy. I know you didn't mean to do it like that. Or I know you didn't mean to offend me or something like that. I know you're a good person. I know that, but when you did this thing or when you said that thing, it ended up affecting me in this way, or it ended up affecting the work in this way or something like that. So you can create a structure around telling someone about their behavior and then how that behavior led to an effect, whether emotional effect or an actual sort of practical effect in the business or something like that, without making it accusatory about their character. So try not to judge. And one thing that we can do is we can separate out someone's behavior from the interpretation that I had of that behavior. So if it pisses me off that they did something or said something, can I get really clear on, okay, what did they do or say? And how did I interpret that thing? Separate those two things out, because if I just come straight at them with my interpretation, you did this thing because you wanted to make me feel this way, or you're rude, or some accusation or something like that, that's going to send them straight into defense mode.
Right.
So I want to try to talk about behavior and keep my interpretation out of it. Unless I talk about my interpretation in a sort of an I statement. It's like, I interpreted it this way. It landed at me this way.
Talk to me about partners in companies, and interpretation and giving interpretation and perspective. And, and because I think a lot of times I as a business coach, I have clients that range from solopreneurs to Fortune 100 companies, everything in between. And I will work with business partners who cannot talk to each other.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and so talk about like, how do you talk to your business partners? How do you open up that first minute of a discussion? I think that's what's really hard. Right. And it's you got the mindset, you got the nerves, you got the triggers, you got everything. But I'm curious, like mixing all that together, right? Not giving your interpretation. How I think people are maybe listening and saying, well, then how am I supposed to actually bring it up?
Well, if you can't talk to your partner, you're having some conflict or some problems with your partner, there has been a lack of trust has been broken in some way. And a lot of times what I've seen when I'm dealing with partners that are in conflict is either one or both of them feel undervalued by the other, where like this, and it could be true that like I don't believe that you're bringing enough to the table, and you don't deserve as much as you're getting in this partnership or something like that. And then maybe the other person feels that and says, this person doesn't respect what I do. They don't think that I'm valuable in this partnership. And so that creates a lot of mistrust. And so that's what I've seen a lot of. And one thing that's important is, how do we rebuild trust? And to rebuild trust, we need to rebuild a sense of mutual value. So I do value you. I appreciate what you do. I understand what you do is hard. I understand what you do is you bring a lot to the table. If that's not the case, if they can't get to a place where they actually value and appreciate the other person for what they do and recognize it, that's a hard partnership to be in. I don't know that that's the right partnership to be in.
Right. And how do you rebuild? I think, conflict. I think conflict when you're ahead of real time and you're managing people and something happens, it's a lot easier to manage conflict than conflict that's been bubbling up for 1, 2, 7, 10, 15, 20 plus years.
Yeah.
And so how do you, I love what you're talking about, but how do you get a new baseline, right? So let's say if a company is, right, so post-COVID, right, a lot of companies are saying, okay, what's my new 3-year plan? What's my new 5-year plan? The world has changed. How we look at e-commerce and all these different things have changed. My role and responsibility may not be what it is today, what it was yesterday. And so I think companies have kind of an opportunity to kind of like reset based on just world circumstances. And so how do they address the conflict without getting lost and stuck in the conflict? You know what I'm saying?
Well, there's the ability to reset at a task level. So like, task conflict is different than relationship conflict. We might be able to reset, like, let's create new roles and responsibilities. Let's create new job descriptions. Let's figure out who's doing what. That can cause a lot of conflict. If we're not clear on that, people are jumping into each other's lanes and stuff like that. That can create a lot of conflict. If we get really clear about who's doing what, that can really help. However, if there's a long-standing relationship conflict, it doesn't really matter what you change on the practical level, on the task level, because people don't trust each other. They don't trust that they value each other, or they appreciate each other, or they recognize each other's contributions. And so that needs to be healed in some way. And so, I mean, I think working with a third party would be really important, unless someone has a lot of skills in this area, because it's going to take, first of all, some reconciliation about some of the stuff that I perceive that person did to me and all that. So there's going to be a reconciliation process, and there's also going to be a process of resetting appreciation and mutual value. So I'm going to have to identify, what do I believe my partner or my coworker brings to the table? What do I think their merits are? What do I think they're valuable? And I've got to be able to articulate that to them so that they hear it from me, that they know, oh, you actually do care about me. You actually do think I'm valuable. We've got to do some resetting there in order to rebuild trust.
Let me ask you a question, because I think a lot of times, I see this, because a lot of the coaching work I do, and just how I'm hearing you talk sounds the same. Someone will say, this isn't a therapy session. Well, you're right. It's not a therapy session, but part of this is about raising your consciousness, frequency, vibration, and awareness of what's going on. And that's more inner work. And so you need almost a business coach that knows when to be a business coach, knows when to be a mentor, knows when to be, in a way, a therapist. But then I think sometimes people can say, well, I don't need a high paid therapist. Well, actually you do. So can you kind of talk about the different roles?
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, when they come to me, for instance, or my company, they're already set up to, like, I want to talk about my conflict. So I don't usually get that pushback that because they almost treat us like therapists.
Yeah.
That being said, psychotherapy really dives, it's not typically action-based. So it's not like coaching. And it dives into all kinds of psychological theories, like attachment theory and parenting style and that sort of thing, which we don't touch on because that's not our job.
Right.
So what I try to tell people is, what I'm looking for is, I want to figure out what kinds of behaviors did you witness and that affected you and that you interpreted in a certain way. And let's take those apart and see why those affected you in that way, why you interpreted that way, how they sat with you. Let's really strategize on that. I also want to flip it around. What kinds of needs or threats or impediments do you think that you might have created for the other person in their eyes, in their perception? And can you own some of that stuff? What kind of responsibility can you take for some of that stuff? Because everyone has a role in this conflict, and whether people want to play victim and it's all their fault or not, the truth is, in conflict, almost all the time, everyone has played some role. So I need to get people to understand how I've interpreted their behaviors, what kind of behaviors I've done that may have been interpreted a certain way that I can own up to, take responsibility for, and then get them to start envisioning a new future, a new relationship. What do you get if you create a better relationship with this person? What could that relationship look like? Okay, what do you think you would need to get to that place? What would you need to start rebuilding trust? What would you need to hear from them, to see from them, to know from them? And what do you think they would need to know from you to start rebuilding trust, to start believing that a better future is possible? And then what would you get from it? So there's a level of motivation that we want to talk about too. So we're talking about motivation, we're talking about perception, we're talking about creating a new vision. So those are some of the strategies we're talking about in conflict coaching, which I don't think necessarily they could be dealt with in psychotherapy, but they certainly there's a crossover there.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about triggers for a second, because as I'm hearing you talk about, you're talking about envision a new future. Well, and to envision a new future, I think you got to let go of the past, or recognize kind of what's triggering you to react and not respond. Yeah. And so, to me, one thing I always say is, children react, adults respond. Mm-hmm. And so how do you get yourself, when you're in the heat of conflict, to say, okay, I'm going to give myself X amount of hours or a day before I jump in and create more conflict? So what's kind of the rest period or the process somebody should go through when having to address conflict?
It could be different for every person. I think an important piece of this is a self-discovery process when you're working to try to figure out how to get out of how to respond correctly to conflict. What are your triggers? What are your typical triggers? And what that means is, what are the things that are said or done or something typically in your environment that get you into fight flight, that get you into sympathetic nervous system stress response? And we can dive into that a little bit. Why does that? What interpretation is happening in your mind to get you to feel like your needs are being threatened or impeded in some way that gets you to fight flight? So we can dive into that, and then you have some of that awareness going into conversations and go, whoa, wait a minute, I'm starting to feel this, and probably this is why. I kind of understand that. And so like having that understanding helps. But in the moment, I would say that if you can deal with something in the moment, A, focusing on your breath is really important. B, is something that I do is, and I teach, is slowing down your speech a little bit so that you can actually really clearly enunciate your words. Because a lot of times people start to talk real fast, or they maybe they slur or something. And if they just slow themselves down enough to enunciate correctly, it'll sort of that slow speech signals to the brain, hey, it's okay, we can slow down, and it can start to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and calm the body down.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of techniques in the moment. If you find that I just can't calm down, I can't respond correctly right now, I'm just too heated, then yes, take some time. And I would say, take at least a day. I mean, maybe in a couple of hours you'll feel fine, but just give yourself a day and check in with yourself, see how you feel. Boy, the amount of times that I responded to something in an ineffective way, and if I only waited a day, it would have been a completely different response.
Yeah.
I can't tell you. So it's like, yeah, just give yourself some space to like take a break. You don't need to respond right now if you can't.
Yeah. I agree. Let's talk about after you've resolved the conflict, you've kind of gotten to a space, and then what the post, relationship, how do you begin to cultivate that without it feeling so robotic?
Yeah.
Like you said, do you suggest that you kind of set a new foundation of communication? Like what does that look like post resolution?
Yeah, I would highly recommend doing check-ins for some period of time. So, whether it's in a personal setting or whether it's a professional setting, hey, we've gone through some sort of process, and we've resolved, or at least started the process of resolving this and starting to rebuild trust. Let's check in once a week on Mondays at 8, at 6 p.m. or Tuesdays at 4 p.m. or whatever it is. We're gonna have a 1-hour meeting. We're gonna check in. We'll see how each other is doing. Yeah. Maybe we have a list of questions that we come up with, and we just ask each other those questions. How are you doing? Be honest about this. Be brutally honest, so that we don't start brushing stuff under the rug again. If something comes up for us, if we're not feeling right about whatever kind of resolution we came to, we're really honest about it. We can talk about it right away, as opposed to holding it and burying it down.
Yeah, I love it. Jeremy, tell everybody who your ideal clients are.
We typically mostly work with companies that are under 1,000 people, companies that don't have large HR departments, or that have no HR departments, and they just can't. They don't have the capacity to handle major conflicts. So they're either dealing with conflict, and then on the larger side, we work with companies of all sizes on the training side. Yeah. So training, whether small to large staffs, on conflict management skills, communication skills, de-escalation skills.
I love it. All right. Ready for a quick speed round, Jeremy?
Sure.
Favorite book and why?
I'm gonna point to Getting to Yes, because that was the sort of first foundational book in conflict resolution that I read, and it lays some of the foundation for this.
Yeah.
This kind of work.
It's great. I love that book.
Yeah.
Best piece of wisdom you've ever received?
Put your emotional needs first. And that's a tough one to swallow, because a lot of people put other people's emotional needs first, and they feel like they're selfish if they don't, and stuff. Putting your emotional needs first as a priority is like putting the oxygen mask on you before you put an oxygen mask on other people.
Yeah, I love it. Finish it. That's great advice. Great wisdom. Finish this sentence. One thing everyone needs to do who is holding on to conflict and not communicating it is
care for each other.
Yeah. One thing someone needs to do to take that first step to resolve a lingering conflict is
have a conversation.
Yeah. One thing somebody who's scared to start and kick off that conversation can do is
be vulnerable. So tell someone that you're uncomfortable bringing this up, and I feel weird or I feel awkward, and I don't want to have this conversation, but I care enough about the relationship that it's worth me being uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Tell everybody how to connect with you, Jeremy.
Our website's called PollackPeacebuilding.com. You can also check out my book, The Conflict Resolution Playbook, on Amazon.
I love it. Jeremy, I really appreciate you being on the show. I think conflict resolution is so important. I don't think people talk enough about conflict resolution.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people just kind of ignore it. They want to put a Band-Aid on it, but conflict resolution, the longer it goes on, the worse it gets, and it is a process to change, right?
Yeah.
So my last question is, how long, talk about the patience needed as everything is resolved.
It depends on how deep and long the conflict's been going on. Some things could be resolved fairly quickly if it's just like some event happened and then you need to reconcile that. Some things are 15, 20-year conflicts that have been going on, and it's going to take quite some time to rebuild trust. So just patience is absolutely a virtue in this sense. Yeah. Don't expect this to go on to change overnight. Be patient.
Yeah, I love it. Jeremy Pollack, I really appreciate you being on the show. PollackPeacebuilding.com. It's been great. This was great. Appreciate your time. Think community. If Jeremy can help, please reach out. Jeremy, thanks again, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Great.